Hello juniors, and welcome back to Computer Systems and Programming. For this video, we're going to be going over reading and writing to TXT files, so to text files. So again, just like all the other videos, we're going to have to make a project folder. So go to File, New, PyDev Project. You can name this project Read Write. I already have this project, so I'm not going to make it. Then once you have this project, you can make a file, new, PyDev module. You can name this module Read, Write, Practice, because we'll be practicing our syntax for practicing and learning the syntax for reading and writing files. So the first thing we're going to do is learn actually how do we open the files. So all you do is you make a file object. This is kind of like a file variable. You're making something to store the file itself. Then you're going to open whatever the file name is. So I'm just going to use this as an example, but you'll put the file name here. Name. And then you're going to put a comma, and then you can put whatever mode you want to open it in. So this isn't the exact syntax, but it's pretty close. So we'll have this variable called file object, and then we'll open this file in this mode. So open is a function that's available to us through Python, and it allows us to open files in certain types of modes. So there's a couple different types of modes. When we're talking about it, there's R, which is read mode. There's W, which is write mode. There is A, which is append mode. Then there is R plus, which is read and write mode. And then if you leave this blank, NA, if you don't have anything written there, then it'll assume that it's R. It'll assume that it's R mode. But the names are pretty self-explanatory. If it's R, or read mode, you're probably going to be able to read the file. If it's W/write mode, it's going to allow you to write into the file. Obviously, if you're reading it, you can't write into it. And if you're writing it, you can't read into it. And then finally, append mode, which is a little different, but all it means is it just adds the stuff that you're writing to the end. So it's the same as write, but it just adds it to the end of it, whereas write it deletes everything in the file and then writes new stuff. Whereas append doesn't delete anything, it just writes on top of it. And then read and write mode allows you to, read and write mode allows you to read and write to the same TXT file. So I'm going to comment this out so that it doesn't throw any errors. But we can start actually using this to do some cool things. So let's open a new file. We'll call it file1. And then we'll open. So you'll see I have all these file.txt's right here. So I'm going to do file1.txt. I'm going to open it in R mode. Now, if you don't have a txt here and you try to open it in read mode, it's going to look for that file and it's going to throw an error. So for example, I don't have a file on.txt. You don't see that here. So if I run this program, run as Python run, it's going to throw an error. No such file or directory was found. So this doesn't exist. But if I run it and I have that file that exists, it'll read it just fine. Now I didn't tell it to do anything with it yet, but it can read it. So make sure if you don't have one, you can just go File, New, File, and then just make a file.txt. And then you can also open it up and just write some stuff into it just so that you have something to work with. Now, that's how to open a file. To close the file, you have to do File 1, and you're going to say .close. So you're telling File 1 to close. It's simple as that. It's really good practice to close a file whenever you open it, because if you leave it open, there can be some bad things that happen to it when you're doing a lot. So it's better to have it open and then close. And in here is where you do stuff with the file. Obviously, you're going to do stuff in between closing it and opening it. So, what can we do with the file? Well, we can write to it. I'm going to change this to R+, so that we can read and write, so we can do things kind of freely. But so let's make a new string variable, and let's just name this Hello World. Then we can say file 1 dot write. And so we can write this string onto the file. So if I run this, file 1 dot write, it didn't print anything. That's weird. But if I reopen this file, it wrote Hello World right here. Now you see it didn't touch any of the other stuff, because when you're in R+ mode, it's a special type of mode, so it's just going to write over the characters that it had. It's not going to delete everything. But if we go to W and we run this again, it'll delete everything and just write over it. So R+ mode is a little interesting, but just keep in mind that it works a little bit different than the W. So to remember that, we can add a little special right here just to kind of remember what that does to it. Now we know how to do the dot write, which allows us to write a string onto our file. But what if we wanted to see what was inside of the file? Well, we'd have to read the file. So let's go over here and change the mode we're in. We'll comment these two things out so it doesn't try to do it. And let's do file 1 dot read. Now, this is going to read the file, but it's not going to do anything with it. So let's store this somewhere. Let's do line and store it there. And just so that we know what was in there, let's print out line, just so it shows us in the console. So we can go ahead and run it. And it goes to this file, reads Hello World, brings it to here, and then prints it out. Now what if I added another Hello Michael to the end of this? Now let's save all of these and run it again. It printed all of this because it reads the whole thing. It reads everything. Hello World and Hello Michael. Reads as just one big thing. Now, if I only wanted it to read one line instead of multiple, I can change this to read line. So now, instead of reading the Hello World and Hello Michael, it'll just read Hello World, and it prints it out. But I can also, instead of, as you noticed, when I print just read, it reads the whole text file as one thing. But if I want it to separate it by lines, I can do this thing called read lines. Now, you'll see when it prints a line is now a list. So when you use this function, when you use read lines, it returns a list. It returns Hello World and Hello Michael on separate lines. So that can be helpful if you're using a lot of different things and you want to separate it by line, you can separate it easily. So we've got a lot of different things we can do. We can write, we can read and write. But the main thing to remember is just that there's a lot of different things and a lot of different functions that are available and that are constantly adding to Python. So instead of trying to memorize them all, just keep in mind what you can do. You can read a file. You can read the line, a singular line. You can read lines multiple. And then on the flip side, you can write. You can write lines. Just like read lines multiple, write lines allows you to write multiple lines as a list. So this will take a list variable. This will take a string. This will take a list. This will return. This returns a list. This returns a string. And this returns the whole file as a string. Whereas this returns a line as a string. And then this returns a whole file as a list separated by lines. So if you understand these things, those are the basics of working with files. So you just open, close, do whatever you want to it, and just make sure whatever you're trying to do, you're opening it in the correct mode. So once you finish this and all of this makes sense to you, you can feel free to look up more stuff online. I think there's plenty of resources when you just look up Python read lines or Python read line. There's all these different things. There's, my favorite website, Tutorials Point, that has plenty of things on reading different files and all the things that's inside of it. But once you're done with that, you can go to the read-write drills, read the activity prompt, do the drills, and then submit them on Canvas as a link to your GitHub repository. Then once you finish that, you can move on to the debug read-write drills and read the activity prompt, do the drills, and then submit the link to your GitHub repository. All right, juniors, I'll see you later.